Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's program. For those of you attending your first program with the Exec Club, my name is Margaret Mueller. I'm the president and CEO of the Executives Club of Chicago. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of our sponsors for the upcoming season. A special thanks to the presenting sponsor of today's program, Kearney. And a quick note, if you should run into any technical issues during the program, just email programs@executivesclub.org, and a member of my team will be in touch to assist. On to today's panel. Kearney is a leading global management consulting firm with more than 3,600 people working in more than 40 countries. The 11th edition of Kearney's Global Cities Index and Outlook, which was released just a few weeks ago, provides a comprehensive analysis of global cities' current competitiveness and prospects. Chicago has its own set of unique opportunities and challenges, and I look forward to the dialogue today diving into the findings of Kearney's Global Cities Report. We will discuss how Chicago has fared over the past year and the outlook for our city's future. The business community is vital to the success of Chicago. Our future as a global city is reliant on our ability to be forward-thinking through innovation, thoughtful and investment of time and resources, and mindful of the ways that we attract and develop talent as we emerge from the pandemic. I want to allow plenty of time for our panel to discuss the findings of the report and the implications for Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Andres Mendoza Pena, partner at Kearney, who will moderate today's conversation. Over to you, Andres.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Margaret. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Andres Mendoza Pena. I'm a partner at Kearney. And before we get started, I would like to extend a special thanks to the Executive Club of Chicago for providing a platform for today's dialogue, to our esteemed speakers for sharing their perspectives, and to everyone tuning in for this program. Kearney is proud to sponsor today's event and to be in partnership with the Executives Club of Chicago. We are a global partner-owned management consulting firm with strong roots in Chicago. And we are passionate about delivering innovative client work that provides kind of clear benefits to the organizations we work with. I'm looking forward to highlighting some of the findings of the Kearney Global Cities Study as it relates to the city of Chicago and the business community, and exciting to hear the dynamic perspectives of our speakers. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our panelists today. We have Commissioner Maurice Cox from the Department of Planning and Development in the city of Chicago, Marcia Cruzan, the Regional President of US Bank and a board member of the Executives Club of Chicago, and Leo Ron, the head of Uber Freight. So before we jump in, I'd like to set the stage and provide some context on the study and the performance of Chicago. So if we can please bring up the, so thank you very much. So if we go to the next page, our study seeks to assess which cities are the best positioned to capture and sustain the global elite in talent and in business, with the intent to inform improvement plans by urban leaders and investment decisions by business executives. Now, what makes a city global? Our research centers on the concept of connectivity, the ability of a city to attract, retain, and generate kind of flows of capital, peoples, and ideas so individual, business, and communities can thrive with global resources applied to local context. If we move to the next page, please. Just to provide more details on how the study is structured. So we have been tracking cities since 2008, and as Margaret mentioned, we are now in our 11th version of the study, which is structured in two complementary analyses. the index, which tracks current performance, and the outlook that assess future potential. In regards to the index, the current performance of more than 150 cities around the world is analyzed through 5 dimensions, 5 areas in which we track metrics that provide the data for the analysis and the composition of the ranking. And those kind of 5 dimensions that we analyze are business activity, where, for example, we look at the flow of goods, the location of headquarters of Fortune 500 companies, the number of unicorn companies, and the like. The second dimension is human capital, where we assess the strength of the local universities and medical schools and the foreign-born population. The third dimension is information exchange, when, for instance, we assess the access to broadband connectivity and freedom of expression. The fourth is cultural experience, when we track the access to sporting events, culinary offerings, and visual and performance arts. And then the fifth dimension is political engagement, where we assess the presence of think tanks, embassies, and local institutions with global reach. So now on the outlook is a forward-looking evaluation of how these same cities are creating conditions for their future status as global hubs. And here we track trend data across several leading indicators that are structured in 4 areas. The first one is personal well-being, where we look at stability and safety and access to healthcare, for example. The second is economics, where we look at foreign direct investment, infrastructure and spending, and GDP per capita. The third one is innovation, where we assess the number of incubators, private investments, and patents per capita. And then lastly, governance, when we assess the ease of doing business, bureaucracy, and transparency. So now let's move on to the results. If we can please move to the next page. Here we have an overview of the results in 2021 for both the index and the outlook, showing the top 10 cities and the historical performance from 2017 to 2021. On the left, you can see the results of the index, and when you look across the historical results, you will find that typically the index is more stable, and New York, London, and Paris have consistently been ranked in the podium. You can also find Chicago as a solid top 10 performer in the 8th position, and it has been able to maintain its positioning in the early phases of the pandemic. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see the historical top 10 results for the outlook, and it shows more variability with London, Paris, and Munich taking the top 3 spots this year. Now, you do not see Chicago in the top 10, and you do not see any US city in the top 10 either. And this is the second year in a row where there is no US city in the top 10 of the outlook study. And when we analyze the underlying trends, we see that the US cities are falling behind other cities in other countries, mostly because of governance metrics, which to some extent are influenced by the federal government policies, but also because of personal well-being. And on the other hand, what we are seeing is the rise of Chinese cities Particularly this year, interestingly, when we look at the cities that improved the most in the rankings, and we found 10 cities that improved more than 10 positions in the ranking, 5 of those 10 cities are based in China. So now, if we move to the next page, where we can see the performance of Chicago in both the index and the outlook. So on the left-hand side, you see the index results. The darker bar is the ranking for the city across all the dimensions. And then in lighter bars, you see the performance across of each of the dimensions. So let's start with the index performance. As I mentioned, Chicago is in the 8th position, and it has sustained this position over several years. Traditionally, the city spikes in human capital. It is a top 5 in the world in human capital, particularly driven by its strengths in the local universities, the medical schools, and the diversity of its foreign-born population. It also ranks fairly well in business activity, is the second best area for Chicago in the index. This year ranks in the 11th position. This is an area where Chicago has done traditionally well across all the different metrics that we track. The positive news this year came on the front of unicorn companies, where we have seen a noticeable improvement in the number of unicorn companies that are based in the city. Now, in terms of opportunities for Chicago in the index, cultural experience is an area where Chicago is still in the top 25, but this year it has been particularly hit in the culinary experience, more so than other cities that perhaps didn't take aggressive measures to protect the population against the pandemic. And also in political engagement, which it has traditionally been an area of opportunity for Chicago. Now, on the right-hand side, you can see the performance of Chicago in the outlook. And here, the city ranks in the middle of the pack, in the 57th position, down from 23rd in 2020. And when you look at the performance across the different areas, clearly innovation is a standout for the city. The ecosystem of incubators and support for startups is making an impact on the rankings of the city. And even though from last year we saw a decrease in the private investments, think venture capital investment, innovation remains the strongest area for Chicago in the outlook. In economics, Chicago ranks in the 35th position. And here, the analysis show that the ability to attract foreign direct investment is perhaps the biggest opportunity for the city. And then, without a doubt, the main area of focus for Chicago is personal well-being. You can see that it ranks in the 119th position, and clearly presenting challenges and also opportunities in 3 key areas: access and quality of healthcare, safety and security, and income inequality. So that's the context of the study, the overall results, and where our city, Chicago, ranks. So with this context, now perhaps we can, take down the presentation. Thank you. And start the dialogue, perhaps the most interesting part of the program. And I would like to start our discussion by asking our panelists to share their initial reactions to Chicago rankings, if there is anything that surprises you or anything that you thought that was validated in the results that you see. Marcia, would you mind getting us started?
Thank you, Andres. I was a bit surprised that we maintained our ranking, but I shouldn't have been, because we all know Chicago is a resilient city and we can withstand a lot. And we have the most investment of any other city in the United States. And as you mentioned in your presentation, we have strong human capital and still have the ability to attract and retain talent in Chicago. But what I would say is it's very troubling to see where we are in the outlook, not only our city, but our country. And there's so much that we're going to need to do to not let that happen.
Yeah, no, indeed, Marcia, and definitely, human capital investments are topics that we will be talking more about in our panel. And Leo, perhaps moving over to you, and the same question, surprises or areas that were validated by the results of the rankings.
Yeah, thanks for having me to discuss this super important topic. I think the first takeaway is this is a super important topic because post-pandemic or even during the pandemic, we are living in a global talent market, and that index means a lot, or the ability to compete on a global level means a lot. Talent can now officially choose to go wherever they want, and employers can choose to employ wherever they want. So the mobility and as a result of that, the competitiveness between cities matters more than any time before. And then specifically on the findings, I think it's just a reminder for just how much potential Chicago has, with sort of that human potential being ranked on top. And really for me, everything around that is how do we unleash that human potential where we just soar ahead and make sure that the human potential can actually fulfill its full potential by creating a personal environment that is safe, by creating a business-friendly environment, by making sure the community understands that. But I think in the end of the day, if you have the human capital, you can organize all the other stuff, I believe. If you don't have the human capital, it's almost impossible to create that. So for me, it's actually a very positive takeaway, seeing Chicago rank so high there.
Yeah, no, they are very good points, Leo. And actually, our study over time shows that human capital and business activity are the two fundamental pillars to enable cities to improve their standing in the global stage. But you're right, and you talk about the potential that the city has, and also Marcia called out some trends that pose challenges to the city. And Commissioner Cox, I would like to get your views about the overall results, and then if you can perhaps start sharing your views on particularly on the personal well-being score. We see the decrease of Chicago, safety, security, healthcare issues that were critical during the pandemic. How can we as city leaders and business leaders work together to shape what is next for Chicago in the post-COVID world?
Well, thank you. And I appreciate the lens and putting Chicago in the context of the kind of global competition. As I look at some of the traditional things that we've judged and where how Chicago ranked even where it has, we have given lots of attention to some of our core strengths, density. both in the Loop, but also in the near north, the near south, and the near west. So you have high density areas that where jobs are being produced in Fulton Market, or areas that we've identified for increased higher density, like the 78 or Lincoln Yards. These are areas that continue to help us stay competitive globally. And then the same can be said about the talent attraction and the universities and the medical facilities that continue to attract talent. And all of this producing a kind of economic vibrancy. What we saw during COVID is that there is a large swath of Chicago that are not participating in this context. We have watched the health disparities exposed by COVID show that life expectancy is radically different according to zip code in the same city. And then we have racial inequities that have been perpetuated for decades. So, it's pretty clear that we are not using all of our human capital to advance this city and in a global market. And I would say that Mayor Lightfoot understood this inherently early on, and as a result, decided to focus on the South Side and the West Side, where areas that have historically been disinvested, where Black and brown Chicagoans live. She charged me to create a parallel framework that would talk about economic development, but through an equitable lens that would be driven by those communities that are there and unearth the talent that has historically always been here, but did not have the opportunity. And so we are now seeing, just in the 24 months since we launched this effort, over $400 million of private investment that is emerging on the South and West side. And so until all of Chicago's geography participates in our claim to be a global community, then we will not be successful. But I feel that we have a direction, and we can show evidence that we're making progress in these areas of that have been historically weak for us.
Yeah, no, that's very on point, Commissioner Cox. And I think as we start talking about the future of the city, the concept of a framework for economic development that is equitable will be critical to unleash the full potential of our human capital, as Lior mentioned. And perhaps now, Lior, coming back to you, Uber Freight recently made the decision to have your headquarters in the city. And you are bringing a fresh set of eyes to us, right? So on one hand, you have made the decision to be in the city, and I think will be important to learn about the key factors that led to that decision. But also, you now have been in the city, and you can shed some light on what are some of the pressing issues that you see for the city today.
Of course, we're super excited to call Chicago home and to place our headquarters in the old post office. And I'm super proud of the moment with the mayor and the Uber CEO, Dara, just a few weeks ago. It's a phenomenal office for us, phenomenal headquarters. The team is already occupying the building, and the energy levels are in an all-time high. So a very exciting moment for us. And in the end of the day, what gave me the confidence to make the decision and make that investment is talent. And in the end of the day, the most important topic that is top of mind is talent. I knew 4 years ago that we can call Chicago home and place a bet on Chicago because I knew the talent base and I knew we can hire thousands of the best logistics professionals in Chicago because the talent base is there. And going forward, the top of mind topic is talent. Like we have now thousands of associates in the city. We want to double that over the next couple of years. And on top of that, we don't only want to be excellent in operation and logistics, we also want to have a world-class development and technology office in Chicago. And the next epoch for us is really being mindful about technical talent and how can we attract and retain the best technical talent out there. And we have pretty lofty ambitions for building a scale office of technology in Chicago so we can combine that operational power with a technology innovation lens and really create a future of logistics together. But, talent, going back to the city survey, attrition rates across, I think, US employers right now is, I think, 20% or higher, which is a crazy number. We're living in the big sort of job display, basically rotation. People are taking a step back post-pandemic, thinking about what matters for them, thinking about their families, thinking about where they want to live, and they're voting with their feet. 20% replacement, that's insane. On one end, it's a threat. On the other end, it's an opportunity because it means that companies are choosing where they're going to place 20% of their talent every year. The cycle is just so much faster. So I think Chicago does have a unique opportunity that 20% is coming to us. And I can just attest from a freight perspective, we now have offices in Chicago, in Dallas, in Boulder, in Arkansas, in North Carolina, in Seattle, in New York. And that's the decision I need to make as a leader every day. Am I going to place the next 10 people in Chicago or in Dallas or in Seattle or in Boulder? And it just makes the talent equation so much meaningful, more than ever before.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And when you frame the attrition as an opportunity, I think it brings a very interesting lens, right? Because as you said, every year you might have the opportunity to determine where you're going to have 20% of your workforce located. And when you look at Chicago vis-a-vis the other cities where you have an office, from New York to Boulder, where looks like clear strength because of the talent pool that we have there. Are there some issues that you identify as clear opportunities for the city?
I'll mention one more opportunity because I mentioned tenure. Chicago tenure is long and people are treated much less. There's something about a sense of loyalty, something about a sense of stability. When I onboard a talent in Chicago, I know that it's a much better ROI investment. And when I say 20%, it's really an average, because if you look at Chicago on average, it's like sub 10. And if you look at the West Coast, it's like 25, 30. So there's just something about that stability that Chicago brings that is top of mind for employers, and I think is a huge opportunity. Like everything, I think so from my perspective, Chicago has established itself as a fantastic place to ramp up talent, to be able to really move very fast and hire thousands of people in a very short time. And the great news now, it's not just me or one or two more examples. To your point, we now have double-digit amount of unicorns just over the past 12 months, which is amazing. And all of those unicorns and myself, as we're looking into sort of what's next, I think it's two that are top of mind for me. One is the technology talent. Can we scale technology in Chicago? Especially when you get to the bigger numbers, do we have the right leadership? Do we have the right infrastructure? Do we have the right sort of velocity? And then the other thing for me is really just making sure that we have, as we're getting into a company now the size of thousands, making sure we have the right leadership the right senior leadership with the right track record, where we can continue to hire the leadership team in Chicago versus having to go somewhere else because the ecosystem has not produced yet enough of an internal talent base to support the next level of growth.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Lior. And I would like to juxtapose the perspective from a new business leader in the city with the perspectives of a very well-established business leader in the city, Marcia. And so you heard Lior talking about the talent pool here in Chicago, the plans to continue investing and placing the bets in the city. From your perspective, having been in the city for a long time and being so ingrained in the business leadership community, what do you see as the differentiating factors that Chicago has to offer for talent that other cities might lack?
Well, I would say Chicago there's so many reasons to attract talent to Chicago. As we've mentioned before, the business investment is high. We're more diverse in our industries than any other city. And I think it's a place that people really want to be. Culture, museums, entertainment, sports, and food. And we have great universities. We have great medical facilities. We have the top law schools. We have the top business schools. And we're more affordable than the other coastal cities. And we really are a destination for young graduates. We've mentioned our tech talent is growing, including life sciences and venture capital firms and the number of unicorns that we have. And we're becoming more digital by the day. And we have our airport. We have the 7th best urban transit system in the United States. And one thing we haven't really talked about is our business leaders are so civic-minded and involved. And you see that partnership in Chicago between government and business work together better than almost any other city you can talk about. We have lots of food entrepreneurship. I was talking to a candidate just last week about coming to Chicago from another city, and he pointed out to me that Chicago has the fourth most diverse food scene in the world, and that we have, I never knew this, 2 of the top 10 coffee shops in the nation per food and wine. So there's just so much to bring talent to Chicago. It's just, when I agree with everything Laura said about Chicago has that sort of stability. And if I look across the spectrum at US Bank, Chicago has one of the more stable groups in the whole nation. And there is that sense of staying and really getting involved in the community. Yeah, and I think, Marcia, you mentioned a few things. You talk about the affordability of the city, and that's is an aspect that is hard to balance, having so many attractions, so many capabilities to offer, and yet becoming affordable. And perhaps, Lior, a quick follow-up on unicorns. We talk about the significant increase in the number of unicorns in the city. Do you feel that there is a result of somehow an exodus of tech talent from the West Coast? Is it because of the hard work that the city has been doing, enabling the startup ecosystem in the city? Is a combination of these factors? Is something else happening here? I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of all of those things, but I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So perhaps, Lior, you can share your views.
Yeah, no, I think, as Marcia said, it's a combination of a few things. It takes time for ecosystem to develop. It takes decades. And I think what we're seeing here is Chicago sort of finding its rhythm after a lot of various level of investment and various enablers over the past few decades. For now to have this thriving ecosystem of startups, it takes Actually, the first in line I will rank is you need a mature group of entrepreneurs that been there, done that maybe once or twice before, and they choose to go back into the ecosystem and rinse and repeat. And they're doing it for the second time and third time. And if you look at those unicorns and you try to track the lineage, a lot of them are second-time entrepreneur, 3 times entrepreneur. They've done it before. They know how to scale. They know how to hire in Chicago. They know what needs to be done. Then you track, okay, so you have the entrepreneur. Then you need the financial system. Kudos to the mayor and the city of doing a lot of efforts around the VC community and meeting venture capitalists and attracting venture capitalists to the city. But you need a local VC ecosystem, and you need awareness at a global and at least a US level for capital to flow into the city and for the VC community to have the faith and the basically commitment to be able to fund those enterprises and those entrepreneurs. And then you need a supporting ecosystem, whether it's the right technical talent, whether it's the right business talent, whether it's the right other types of talent for those entrepreneurs with that capital to be able to build the nucleuses teams in Chicago. And what you see here is all of those takes decades to work out. You need those entrepreneurs, you need that capital. What you see now is everything sort of coming together and Chicago hitting its stride. And the trick is you need to do that across a couple of industries where you develop those big pockets. To Marcia's point, I think we have it on food now. We definitely have it in logistics. That's where I'm coming from. And we have an amazing talent base in logistics. I know we're putting a lot of effort into quantum. It's really identifying those few verticals where Chicago can have a fair advantage and then creating a thriving ecosystem on top.
Yeah. Commissioner Cox, you talk about the importance of a framework for equitable economic development, and Lior highlighted the relevancy of a financial system and attracting private investments. Can you elaborate your views on how the private sector, the private investment can help with an equitable economic development for the city?
Sure. I think the key here is, can you use public incentives to catalyze private development? And to do that in areas where the market hasn't traditionally gone. And that's largely why Mayor Lightfoot brought together over $750 million of public resources that are specifically meant to catalyze private development in 10 geographies on the South and West Side. So our first responsibility is to retain talent. And on the South Side and on the West Side, in Black and Latino professional communities, they have not always seen the city set the framework and stage for continued economic prosperity. So our opportunity, our charge was to provide the opportunity and to create the framework so that you could begin to build that ecosystem of entrepreneurs that can bring about this higher density, almost nodes of activity that are truly neighborhood based. So it, in many ways, is a system of nodes throughout neighborhoods where you can have a smaller scale mix of a pedestrian-oriented development, and you could arguably live, work, and shop in those communities. And then that it naturally builds the small business ecosystem that will then occupy the shops and provide the neighborhood services and amenities. So this is in addition to some of our core strengths in transportation and distribution and logistics, in health care and in life sciences, and in traditional manufacturing. We have to create new places for this investment to go. And I really believe that when we bring the entire geography of Chicago into play, we will only see our global competitiveness increase.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about the investment opportunities to unleash the full potential of the city, perhaps, Marcia, you have a unique perspective in the economy of the city. And we talk about private investment, and our study found that one of the areas where the city could improve its positioning for the outlook is by attracting additional foreign direct investment. So therefore, how do you see that the city can improve its attractiveness for FDI? And what else can the city do to strengthen its overall economy?
Well, the good news is that for 7 years in a row, Chicago has ranked as the top city for foreign investment. And we have 900 foreign-based companies. We have one of the largest diplomatic communities representing 89 countries, and we have almost 100 international chambers of commerce or international trade organizations. And we have 29 international sister cities. So we have the basic framework to continue that growth. And I think as we look at the things that we need to solve in the city, I think we start with a very good urban transportation system. We have our railroads. We have 6 of the 7 Class 1 railroads that run through Chicago. So we have all those ingredients that really create that opportunity for foreign investment. But we have the other things that we need to solve. We know safety, security, the branding of our city, the increased investment we need in transportation, the income and health inequality, all of those things that we need to present a better picture to the world. And so I think, in essence, in addition to solving all those things, we need to better rebrand Chicago as a city that is livable, affordable, and safe.
It's a very good point, Marcia. The brand of the city, perhaps for those that have had the opportunity to travel abroad or that have family abroad, Chicago perhaps is a city that is not as well recognized as it should, given the offerings that it has for its inhabitants and visitors. And linking it to the point about the focus area for the city, Commissioner Cox, what do you think could be the actions that the city can take, not only to improve the fundamentals that, of course, are critical, but also to ensure that all the benefits that the city has to offer are communicated clearly to its citizens, the other inhabitants of other cities, considering where to relocate, and to the entire world?
Well, I mean, I think that's an excellent question because it speaks to a larger vision of what Chicago sees itself as. And in order to do that, you have to have a citywide plan. And so last year, the mayor launched the We Will Chicago plan. When this plan is done, it'll take a couple of years. It'll be the first citywide plan in Chicago's 50-year history. And it implies that if we can have a citywide conversation around the core principles of equity and resiliency, we can begin to position ourselves more strongly globally. And so we are looking at this through the lens of economic development, through health, through lifelong learning, through neighborhoods, to be able to have a single conversation across the city's geography that turns into a policy document that can guide decisions on how we invest and where we invest. And this process really speaks to how we present ourselves to the world. and that we come upon those that roadmap together with the consent of Chicagoans. So I'm thrilled that my office is leading this effort, but it will help us look beyond the political cycle and think generationally, quite frankly, in terms of how the city can present itself in a unified manner.
Yeah, that's very exciting, and thanks for sharing those plans with us and the audience, Commissioner Cox. And now that triggers a thought, right? We know that sustainability is becoming a critical issue. Nowadays, we have been following the news, COP26, and this is perhaps a question for all the panelists, but let me start with you, Commissioner Cox. Briefly, what can the city of Chicago and the businesses headquartered here in the city do to drive sustainability in a meaningful way?
Right. No, I think at the core of some of the things we've talked about is a sustainable agenda. Even the belief in density and access to transit or reusing some of our historic resources in terms of buildings is embedded in sustainability. But it's also a question of restoring the land, whether it's massive reforestation and tree planting, whether it's the vacant lots that actually are performative lots that we have on the south and west side, to even a commitment to net zero buildings, both in our downtown and in neighborhoods. So we have two examples where we are trying to do the first net zero carbon building residential high-rise through the C40 competition, and a similar commitment to integrating sustainability into the commonplace buildings of neighborhoods. So we can both pilot very specific examples while we also have a citywide conversation about how our transportation, where we create population density simultaneously to support and make a more resilient Chicago. So I thought it was really telling that when we asked the public what should structure the future of Chicago in the We Will Chicago plan, equity and resiliency were the two top principles. And so I think it's consistent with what your report found. I think it's been consistent with conversations, the comments of your panelists have had today. So I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, indeed. And perhaps, Leo, if you don't mind, sharing your views as a business leader, and how can the business community help to drive sustainability in the city?
Absolutely. I think that's probably the most important topic of our lifetime. How can we create a more sustainable future? And I think as a business community, as business leaders, we can weave sustainability into everything that we do, and weave sustainability as a business goal in everything that we do. And I fundamentally believe if you look at sort of the next era of innovation, Chicago has an opportunity through its industry focus to drive sustainability and drive efficiency to the next level. Even just looking at the two examples of industries we touched on this conversation, whether it's the future of food and how can we create a much more sustainable food consumption and food production industry of the future, which is a huge cause for emissions today. Or if you look at transportation, which is probably now the largest cause of emissions globally, and thinking through ways, whether it's on the car side or on the commercial side, on the freight side, to drive a more sustainable future. I'll give you one example. About 30% of all pollution today is in the world is happening with transportation. 30% of that is happening with trucks. 30% of trucks are running empty. So if you just multiply all of that, like 2 to 3% of global emissions are because trucks are running empty on the road. So as technologists, we have a unique opportunity to make this much more efficient, to much better plan the flow of logistics globally and in the US, and as a result, just make a much more sustainable future for everyone involved.
That's great. And Marcia, I would like to offer the opportunity to share your views on how the business community can impact Chicago's sustainability future.
Well, there's been an avalanche of ESG goals that companies have put in place, and we're finding a number of companies, especially large investment grade companies, that are issuing bonds, green bonds, and the pricing is tied to the meeting the performance of their ESG goals. And one of the things that's as these kind of financing come together, there's been a lot of concern about how do we measure those? So recently there's a large international global group being formed, and it's really to standardize all of the metrics. And that really is so important in order to analyze the impact of these goals and to make comparisons among companies. And so I think we're just going to continue to see more tangible evidence of companies really being committed to sustainability and all of the ESG goals.
Yeah, that's great. And now perhaps to start wrapping up the discussion, it's interesting to see how Chicago has done well over the years. We did hear about the strength of its human capital, an area where Chicago has done extremely well since the beginning of the study. And also we learn about some of the challenges that the city is facing, particularly the extra stress test that the pandemic has placed on the well-being of its inhabitants. But after listening to the panelists, it really stood out to me when Marcia talked about how engaged and civic-minded are the business leaders of the city. And that's really a differentiating factor for the city. Leo, your comment about the progress that the city has done to foster the ecosystem of innovation, that now we are seeing the results in the number of unicorns, perhaps just one metric, but as you said, that's the result of many years of effort. And also, Commissioner Cox, when you talk about this framework for equitable economic development, the We Will plan focus on equity and resiliency, it's hard not to be optimist and being excited for the future of our city. And I hope that next year we can regroup and analyze the results of our study, and we can see how all these ingredients that the city has start to impact the results, and we can start to see the city back in an upward trajectory in the rankings. I would like to thank the Executive Club of Chicago. Very special thanks to the panelists for your time and insights. And I wish everybody a good afternoon. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.